All right, thank you guys so much. We're really excited to be here, and I know you are all very excited to be here to talk about trade compliance after lunch. Super pumped. I know you're all wide awake. So I'm Abby Freeman Contino, and I'm with Sierra Nevada Corporation, and I'm here today with my colleague Adrian Armour with Reaction Engines. We are not the beer company. REI is not the sleeping bag company. We are both in the aerospace and defense business, and we're going to talk about trade compliance. But before you all run for the doors, please can you lock those from the inside? This is going to be a fun session. This is not going to be the serious trade compliance regulatory regimen that you've been fed if you've been through some of these trade compliance briefings in the past. We're here to have a good time. Believe it or not, trade compliance can be fun. So with that, when the World Trade Center asked us to speak about this topic, of course, you know, naturally we asked, well, what took you so long? Actually, we thought, why would anyone be so interested in our war stories of international trade compliance? Why would what we have to say be unique or different than maybe what you have experienced in international trade before as well? And I think it has something to do with potentially taking something like trade compliance, which is rules and regulations and
super
restrictions. Something that's never fun, right? Who likes rules? We do not like rules. Believe it or not, even those of us in the trade compliance function do not like rules.
It's true.
But we have sort of the opinion that you can take something like rules and regulations and use it to your advantage. You can actually take those and have a little fun with them as well, believe it or not. So we're gonna share with you some of our stories from the road today. And before we get into that, I kind of want to talk to you a little bit about that strategy. And there's something that happened in the last month that was announced through our current administration through a national security presidential memorandum, NISPM 10. I'm not going to read the whole thing to you, but I do want to read an excerpt because I think it highlights sort of that natural balance that exists between international trade promotion and international trade controls. Yes, we can be friends.
It's true.
And then we're going to tell some of those quick stories. So this particular memo, NISPM 10, every administration has their own set of memorandums that they issue, that they release. Our current administration just calls them the NISPMs. That's all it means, nothing super fancy or complicated. I told you we're going to have fun. We're not going to talk about rules. So it says that it strives to better align our policy regarding conventional arms transfers with our national and economic security interests. The memo aims to strike a balance across maintaining technological edge over potential adversaries, strengthening partnerships that preserve and extend our global influence, bolster the economy, spur research and development, enhance the ability of the defense industrial base to create jobs, increase our competitiveness in key markets, protect our ability to constrain global trade in arms that is destabilizing or that threatens our military, our allies, or our partners, and better equip our allies and partners to contribute to shared security objectives and to enhance global deterrence. That was all over the map, right?
Yeah.
We're talking about restricting global trade, and we're talking about promoting global trade all at the same time. And this is a unique way that we in the trade compliance community can help to strategize and can actually help to further international trade in our businesses. So that's what we want to kind of hone in on today, is to talk about how we can turn this concept on its head without tipping the ship over, right? And use trade compliance as a strategic competitive advantage. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Adrian. She's going to kick off some of our fun stories of international trade wars of old.
Awesome. Thank you for the intro, Abby. I really do like the way that memo is worded, even though it's all over the place, because that's the blurry line that we tread all the time, right? Globalization versus protectionism. And in international trade compliance, we really are in this gray area that we have to navigate, and sometimes that can be frustrating and confusing. I'm confused by the regulations at least once a week, and that's when I call Abby. She's on my speed dial. But we just wanted to spend the short time that we have with you today to let you know about a few tips that we've come across that may seem pretty straightforward, but is still worth talking about. So tip number 1, start with a good foundation. In export, what I mean is know your product. From your overall systems to the nuts and bolts, take the time at the very beginning, well in advance of shipping, to classify your products and know where they fall. It's much easier to do this work up front. And if you are stuck, our government officials are more than happy to get on the phone and help you out with this, and you can obtain a commodity jurisdiction if need be. What you'll find as you dig into your product classifications is that some of your products could differ depending on their end use or how they're specially designed. And those regulations, as you all probably well know, can shift over time. So for example, I once worked a program that developed wind hazard analysis systems for airports. Helps planes all over the world from Las Vegas to Hong Kong land safely, which is kind of important.
Big deal.
And we obtained a commodity jurisdiction from the Department of State for EAR 99, which is great. As you all know, that means no license required to most places. However, all of those contracts came with stipulations for spare parts. And just because a system is classified one way does not mean that the spare parts, if shipped separately, are going to be classified the same way. So over time, I was able to develop a spreadsheet, do those classifications well in advance, so that when I was asked to do a shipment, I didn't have to scramble and find out whether I needed a license ahead of time, because many of those spare parts were controlled more so than the system overall. Occasionally the program did throw me some curveballs, and I was able to work together with my program folks to determine those on time. But overall, having that spreadsheet, doing those classifications ahead of time really spared me some heartburn. So another, let's pretend that the US government approached that wind hazard analysis system and said, hey, we really like how precise you are. We'd like you to do wind hazard analysis for our military tanks. Do you think that's going to be EAR 99 anymore?
Yeah, it's the same. You told me it was.
Yeah.
You told me it was. It is forever.
Unfortunately, it's not. So it'll be a little bit more controlled, and then we can go get a license for those sorts of things. So be sure to work with your friendly neighborhood government officials early and often. They really are our friends. And I think Abby has a story that highlights that too, don't you?
Yeah, so speaking about government officials, and yes, we did intend to put those weird images up there on the slide. Those are intentional. Our penguin friends. So speaking about government agencies, in any case when you're exporting something or when you're importing something, you may have multiple US government agencies and even foreign government agencies that you have to work with to determine the jurisdiction of your product. In the case of the airport technologies and the tank technologies, it's state and commerce, and they've got jurisdiction depending on what you're using it for, depending on what you've modified it for. I had an incident come across my desk a couple of years ago that I will never forget. And I did end up pulling in a lot of different government agencies. So of course, as you all typically do to us international trade compliance professionals, you hit us up on Friday afternoon at 4 o'clock, right? Every time. And so I begrudgingly answer my phone, knowing that I'm headed to happy hour really soon. Pick up my phone, and the person on the other end just says, radioactive penguins. And I'm like, what?
I'm still amazed there's a graphic that was
Yeah, there's a
for
graphic.
that. Yeah.
Like, who knew? I was not the first person, apparently, because somebody made an image. Radioactive penguins, that's what they say to me over the phone. All I do is trade compliance, so there should be no other reason. So I'm assuming that Ashton Kutcher is around the corner, punking me. Something's going down. This can't be real. So my first question was, is this the name of your garage band? Because I have plans tonight. That's not happening. So no, it was not the name of their garage band. We had a research vessel coming back from Antarctica, and it was sitting 100 miles out of the port of Fouchon in Louisiana, and it had on board radioactive penguins.
Dun, dun, dun.
So I know you're all wondering, how did these penguins get radioactive? What are you doing to them? Those poor penguins, right? All of these questions are running through my mind as well. But they also informed me that they were about to shut down the port of Fushan because we had radioactive materials that had not been announced to customs. So we got to move quickly. So my happy hour is out the door. We're done. No more happy hour for me. And so I start digging into the regulations because that's what we trade nerds do. We dig into the regulations. We figure out what is it we have to do to make this happen. This was an import. It was radioactive. It had to do with wildlife. And it was coming from a non-country. It was coming from Antarctica, a territory, right? Not something that's a country per se. So country of origin gets a little tricky as well. So after digging into the regulations, I determined that we needed to reach out to the USDA, Animal Plant Health Inspection Services. Typically they deal with live animals, so I bounced on over to Fish and Wildlife. Determined that we did need a CITES permit to bring these penguins back. They had been penguins that were deceased during the research process down in Antarctica, properly authorized, mind you. And we did have some CITES permits that were buried someplace. They just hadn't been provided. Nobody notified us that they were coming in. And then the radioactive material. What do you do with that, and why? Why are they radioactive? So I had to ask the question. I'm like, what are you doing to these penguins? So apparently they were using radioisotopes to track the penguins on the ice, and then after they died, they would go and collect them, and they would bring them back for further research. Okay, it all makes sense now, but they're radioactive. So reached out to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission and informed them that we had these radioactive penguins coming back in. Who knew there was a treaty? There was an exemption for Antarctic radioactive materials coming back in. They worked really closely with us. We got the stuff cleared, and the port did not close, thankfully. Everyone that I worked with in that whole process was very amenable to supporting US international trade and getting these things in and out appropriately and legally. So the lesson there is really talk to your government officials. Don't be afraid of them, and talk to us as well. We might shame you a little bit if you do something like that at the last minute. Like, we might talk about your story publicly, but
My OS chocolate.
yeah, we'll use it against you. But we really will work with you, and we will try to facilitate your international trade. And if any of you are working in international trade, I encourage you to do the same and to work with your folks as well. So with that, we're going to flip over to our next slide really quick and talk about, again, using those competitive strategies, using that international trade compliance strategy to implement these practices at every stage of your business.
Yes, so as Abby mentioned earlier, I work for Reaction Engines. I work for the US subsidiary of the UK-based company. There's about 7 of us in Castle Rock right now. And as you can imagine, we all have many hats. One of the reasons that I wanted to join Reaction Engines is because I'm an export compliance nerd, and I was looking forward to implementing a strategic program that allowed us to collaborate with our UK parent on really sensitive technology. We develop hypersonic propulsion. As you imagine, that's pretty sensitive to the US government as well as many governments around the world.
Very cool stuff.
So, in order to help me understand the pain points that my parent company experiences when dealing with US regs, I went to a UK conference in Stratford-upon-Avon last July titled The ITAR Virus Ear Valves, which I found highly entertaining.
So catchy.
And I was not the only American there. We had friends from Department of State and Department of Commerce that were there to speak. Some of the workshops were titled ITAR and EAR Contamination, or Navigating the Minefield of OFAC, which I can't deny it. It makes a little bit of sense sometimes when I'm navigating those things myself.
It's a little hurtful, though.
Yeah. But while I'm bummed, to some extent, that my British friends consider me the stomach flu of their business, I've decided to think of myself as preventative care. As Abby mentioned earlier, if we involve export compliance in all levels of the business, you'd be surprised how strategic we can be. Export compliance involved in contracts and procurement can ensure that you are screening all of the parties that you work with through the specially designated national lists. We can be involved in government affairs for government-to-government agreements to ease export issues. In marketing, it helps to have us on board for public releases. In human resources, we can help with hiring, make sure that nobody gets in trouble there. Involving export compliance at the very beginning in your business development capture phase can ensure that we get licenses strategically and on time, and we're not slowing anything down, because we know that licenses sometimes take a long time to get through, and that's just the way the process goes. If you get us involved early, we can help. And of course, cybersecurity and shipping. We also, as Abby mentioned before, we actually enjoy digging through regulations, and we know that there's a lot of regulations to navigate through. And so we are here to help, and please feel free to get us involved in everything to help you out. But Abby has a story about an actual virus.
Of course I do. Of course I do. Yes, be the inoculation, not the virus. So speaking of viruses, again, sitting at my desk one day, just waiting for something to happen, right? I get an import request across my desk, and it just says $1 human specimen. And this is again from Antarctica, and I'm thinking, we don't do research on people down there. What are we doing here? What's happening? And so I dig into a little bit further, and I determine that this is coming from a university researcher that's doing some research down in Antarctica. So I pick up the phone, and to protect the names of the innocent, we'll call it Monsters University, because I'm a toddler mom. So I call up Monsters University, and the head of the Department of Epidemiology, who apparently was in charge of this project, and I ask him what it is. And he seems really annoyed with me that I haven't cleared it through customs yet, but I'm like, human specimen, I'm gonna need a little bit more than that. Need a little bit more information before I can tell customs what this is and get it cleared. So he says, well, it's nasopharyngeal swabs. And I'm like, well, I'm no medical professional, but nasopharyngeal, it's a nose and throat swab? Okay. From humans. Why are we swabbing humans? Well, there's this flu virus that goes around every year. Everybody that goes down there that gets it, for about 2 weeks, they get these flu-like symptoms, they get better, they come home. Well, we research everything in Antarctica. Everything gets researched.
It's an interesting place.
Every year they swab them, and they bring this stuff back. So I'm like, okay, well, go back to the regulations. I do my research, and I determine the CDC might have something to say about this. They have some rules that say if you're importing infectious substances, which when I read the definition of infectious substances, swabs from sick people would be infectious substances. So I said, well, if it's an infectious substance, we need an import permit from the Center for Disease Control. And he said, well, it's not infectious, it's frozen. Again, I'm not a medical professional. And Dr. Wazowski is a medical professional. He's telling me that this is not an infectious substance because it's frozen. I said, well, what if it melts? And he's like, it's dry ice, it doesn't melt, it dissipates. No. All right. So what if the dry ice dissipates and the box breaks open? He's like, well, it's double wrapped, it's sealed in a bag, and it's frozen, it's not infectious. And I'm like, still not convinced. So I'm like, all right, what if your snot sickles thaw out, the bag rips open, the box rips open, and I, not a medical professional, not very smart, walk by and I lick it. I had this conversation with the head of the Department of Epidemiology at this university. But he tells me, well, I guess you could get sick. Thank you. I'm going to call that an infectious substance. So I tell him, we're going to need an import permit. It's not that big of a deal. I'll help you. The CDC will help you. We'll get this stuff cleared. We'll hold it on dry ice until it's cleared, and then we'll bring it in appropriately. But nobody wants us to illegally smuggle a virus into the United States, because I can just see all of us like just going to jail. And I don't want to be in a room with this guy. I definitely don't want to be in a jail cell with this guy, because he did not sound like a lot of fun. But again, lesson learned, use these strategies to your advantage. Get ahead of the game, ask questions early, use your trade compliance staff to your advantage, get them involved in the business capture phase. Make sure that they're aware of what you want to do. Tell them before you ship something. It's a long trip from Antarctica to LAX. Make sure that they know before you ship something crazy that it's coming. And we are here to help, just like every government agency is, right?
Getting a call. Hello? Oh, Abby, it's for you. Have you heard of Crimea?
Crimea?
Yeah.
Oh, we gotta go.
Your guys want some rocket launchers there by
We gotta
Thursday.
go. We're done.
So, well, tanks, radioactive, penguins, and viruses. We have time for 1 or 2 questions. Anybody?
So, when you're saying no, how do you get the buy-in to say, okay, I'm with you, how can we fix this? So if you're having to tell your intercompany executive leadership team that we can't proceed down this road, how do you convince them to get on board?
That's a great question. I think you have to be part of that team from the get-go, right? You have to start building that relationship before you tell them no. And so when you do tell them no, they're going to understand that you mean no and that you're only going to say no when you absolutely have to. And there are instances where we do have to, but there are a lot of instances where we can say, not now, but later, or we can say, yes, but with these restrictions. And so I think just being really a team player and having that partnership with your program personnel, with your business development personnel, with everyone that's on your team, and letting them know up front, doing that training up front, letting them know, set the expectations that this is what it's going to take to get the job done. And then slowly but surely, you'll be integrated into that process earlier in the game, and they're going to know before you even have to tell them that the answer is no, right?
Right. And also, along those same lines, I feel like I'm really loud all of a sudden. Just demonstrating that you've done everything you can to try to say yes first, because then the effort has been demonstrated. You've tried to pursue all of those different avenues, and sometimes we do have to say no, but we try really hard not to. And I think it's, along with the relationship building, just proving that you did really try everything you can. Hopefully we'll get folks on board. It won't always work. Been there, but very good question.
Yeah.
Maybe one more question? No? Okay, let's give a round of applause to
Thank you.
Abby and Adrian. Thank you.